This lesson involves problems related to hypothesis testing that can occur in reports of statistical data. After completing this lesson, you will be able to recognize when a conclusion may have been influenced by an over-reliance on either statistical or practical significance. Before we discuss problems in hypothesis testing, let's quickly review what it is. This is the process we typically go through when we test a hypothesis. Oftentimes you may not be involved in the earlier stages of the process and may only need to work on analyzing the data. Data analysis involves calculating a statistic, which is often a ratio of the shared variation between the variables to total variation in the model, then determining the probability value or p-value associated with that statistic. If the statistic you calculate has a p-value that is less than 0.05, then the findings are said to be statistically significant. Statistical significance is the main way in which we evaluate a hypothesis. This tells us the likelihood that our statistic was large enough to be beyond chance. Another type of significance that is less discussed but is equally important is practical significance. Practical significance gives us an estimate of the size of the statistic we have found and helps us to determine whether the differences between samples are big enough to have real meaning. Statistical significance reflects the chance or the probability of the finding and is estimated using p-values. We accept a 5% probability that the relationship between the variables in our sample is by chance. Practical significance reflects the magnitude or strength of the finding and is a better indicator of the strength of the relationship than p-values. Effect sizes typically range between 0 and 1. Statistical significance is a function of both practical significance and sample size. This means that anything can be shown to be statistically significant if we increase the size of the sample. It is therefore important to focus on both of these estimates when evaluating results in a statistical report. Let's put this in context with some examples. The following statistics show an over-reliance on statistical significance. Researchers have found that people who use toothpicks are 1.5 times more likely to get a rare gum disease known as archaeomelanitis than people that don't. This report makes the use of toothpicks seem like a real threat to your health. However, if you look at the actual numbers, you'll find that the likelihood of getting archaeomelanitis when you don't use toothpicks is 1 in a million, whereas the likelihood of getting archaeomelanitis when you use toothpicks is 1.5 in a million. Are you worried about raising your risk from 0.00001 to 0.000015? Here's another example of a statistical conclusion that is statistically significant but not practically significant. Based on USDA's residue data, the following fruits and vegetables are often referred to as the dirty dozen because they have more deadly pesticides than other produce. However, the amount of these dirty produce that you'd have to eat each day to get sick is really high. As you can see here, it is virtually impossible to eat enough of these residues to make you sick. Similar reports are often seen in descriptions of things that cause cancer. An article in the Huffington Post by Michael Jacobson helped to unveil the problems with several reports that the caramel coloring in soda could be linked to cancer. It turns out that you'd need to drink 18,000 20-ounce bottles of cola before you have enough coloring to potentially cause cancer. Our final statistic in this section is the link between cell phones and cancer. Ever since cell phones were introduced, they have been rumored to cause cancer. A few years ago, the World Health Organization developed a special task force to look into the effects of cell phone radiation on our health. What they found was that the use of cell phones does have a statistically significant link to cancer. However, its classification is as a group 2B carcinogen. Other carcinogens in this category include coffee, pickled vegetables, night shift work, talcum powder, and the cadmium found in Miley Cyrus bracelets sold at Walmart. There is therefore little practical meaning to this statistically significant relationship. The previous reports highlighted an over-reliance on statistical significance at the risk of not being practically significant. Now we'll discuss how statistical reports can inflate practical significance. These are discussed in your Joel Best readings on false statistical milestones and dramatic discoveries. False statistical milestones refer to the fact that estimates may gradually increase or decrease over time, but are mainly noticeable when they reach a milestone number. An example of this can be seen in the following statistic. The U.S. population reached 300 million in 2006. Once this occurred, concerns were raised on the rate of growth of the population. However, there was little need for concern. The population size was more noticeable once it reached this milestone number. However, the underlying trend was simply a steady growth in the population over time. Another example of reaching a false statistical milestone can be seen with the following statistic. 51% of women are now living without a spouse. Once again, the 51% is more noticeable due to the figure crossing over the halfway mark of 50%. However, the results were due to steady trends over several years from women marrying later, divorce being more common, and women living longer than their spouse. It only became noticeable once the value hit 51%. The final problem related to hypothesis testing I'll discuss is that of dramatic discoveries. Findings in science are often proved to be wrong over time. This means that dramatic discoveries are often discounted later on in the life cycle of the research. Any empirically driven findings requires testing and retesting before you're able to get at the true relationship between variables. This problem was highlighted in the Journal of the American Medical Association, in which 32% of its clinical research reports were later proved exaggerated or wrong. Several articles published reports on treatments that were later proved to be not effective, and several other articles published reports on treatments that were later proved to be much less effective than previously claimed. In summary, I'll borrow a quote from Darrell Huff, the author of How to Lie with Statistics. Keep in mind that the difference is a difference only if it makes a difference. This speaks to the fact that we need to examine multiple pieces of evidence when evaluating a statistical report. When it comes to hypothesis testing, you need to evaluate the statistical as well as practical significance of the findings, and keep in mind that these could change over time as additional data are collected and additional statistical analyses are run.